Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Hey everyone, and welcome to All Together, the Family Science Insights podcast, produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element, with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Dina Sargent. Let's get started. Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode. Now, when it comes to loss, it can always damage the way that we act amongst the family, especially if that family member was an integral part in that connection. We all heal from loss, but how do we stay resilient as a family? That's a quick look into our discussion today, and now we are joined by clinical psychologist, family therapist, as well as author, Dr. Froma Walsh. Thank you so much for joining me today, Froma.
Pleasure to be here with you.
Now, I've had the pleasure of reading one of your books, The Complex and Traumatic Loss. Now, it talks about so many different circumstances, including the different types of traumas surrounding the loss, the roles and family dynamics that change, as well as the different pathways to healing. Now, as your work as a clinical psychologist and a family therapist, what is your role in assisting families with traumatic losses?
It's very important, and sometimes we don't attend to the family concerns. I think most in the United States, in much of Europe, and I think in Australia and Asia as well, the focus in mental health services is very much about the individual. A family might send in a child or a spouse who is suffering too much, or maybe a child who's misbehaving. And that individual is seen in individual assessment, and then the symptoms are assessed because our diagnostic ways in the mental health field are looking for what's wrong and how are things not working for you. You're not able to function, you can't eat or you can't sleep, or maybe you're causing trouble with other people or you're drinking too much. And while that person is truly suffering, we're losing sight of what else is going on in the family. Because when a family member dies, it might be a parent, but it means all the siblings are having reactions. A spouse is losing their partner. Aging parents and family members are losing their child. So there are going to be many reactions in the family, and the intensity of the loss is going to affect family functioning. So it could be that there's a breakdown and a lack of support, and each individual has to go off on their own to try to find their way of healing. And maybe one comes to us, a child, or maybe more often it's a female family member. And it might be that the breadwinner has to go to work every day and doesn't really have time or space to grieve. So it's very important to ask about, no matter who is coming for help, or within the family to think about, yeah, that child seems to be doing just fine, but he's also experienced a loss, and maybe he's trying to be helpful, to help out, because he can see that others are really in distress.
Mm-hmm. Now, when it comes to that, what is the most common concern that families usually share when it comes to wanting to heal after that loss?
Well, first of all, there's the devastation of we can't fix this. We can't, this is not a problem we can solve. And I know in many societies, many cultures, especially Western cultures, we're very much focused on what can we do? How can we fix this, solve this problem? And so it's very hard to know what to do when a loved one is grieving. Often in a couple, maybe one partner is grieving intensely and the other one wants to be helpful but doesn't know what to do and backs off. or one is trying to be, one partner is trying not to show emotion so that they can be strong for the family. When what we need to do is help both of them to come together in mutual support. The one thing that we've found in research over decades now, I've been doing this work for a long time, is that a tragic death in the family can break families apart. If couples can't support each other, they may just distance and go separate ways, or they may fight over blaming each other or feeling the other one isn't caring enough, and it can really corrode their relationship.
Mm-hmm. Now, that's such a great introduction into our topic today. Before we discuss it even further, I'd love to get to know some of your recommendations as well as some of your interests by playing our channel's favorite little icebreaker. Now, to start off with, what is the most recent book that you've read?
That I've read. Well, I must say that I'm still very active in my own work, and it's mostly I'm reading about things that are happening in the world. And so I don't have a happy story to tell you that I'm reading. I'm mostly reading news around the world and trying to understand and to see how, in the midst of war, in the midst of these climate crises, how we can do something to make a difference that's going to be positive. So I'm mostly reading, I listen to podcasts. I'm reading the world news just to understand more deeply, like people are suffering in many places around the world right now. Natural disasters because of climate change. Families who are losing members through migration and through refugee and displacement. And so I am still very active in my practice, and I want to be of help and of service where I can be.
Mm-hmm.
So sorry, it wasn't very cheerful, but I guess what I'm always looking for is I don't mean a silver lining exactly, but how in the midst of things that are going so badly, and we've just come through this pandemic as well, how can we rally? Because human resilience is about coming together and being connected and finding others who can support us and how we can support one another. And how can I be part of that?
Mm-hmm. No, that's great, especially in this day and age. It's great to have people who are really wanting to find different ways, and especially in your line of work, it must be really hard to sort of see everything that's going on as well. Now, to go on, what is a movie that you would recommend to our viewers?
Oh my. I just, I have not seen movies in a long time because of the pandemic. And so we end up watching things on Netflix or other things like that. Again, I guess what I'm thinking I need at this time is some ways to find nourishment. And so I'm looking for something that's positive, maybe something that's a little bit of lightness, of humor, of laughing together with family members or friends. But we need a little bit of lightness in the midst of this darkness.
Mm-hmm. No, that's very true. I think comedy and humor is probably one of the best ways of healing any kind of situation. So it's strange how effective comedy actually is.
Oh, absolutely. We all need to not to be mired in troubles of the world and then to turn on. I don't want to watch horror movies or futuristic movies where we're fighting for our survival. Things are bad enough, and I want to be able to find a way to nourish my spirits.
No, that's very true. Now, to go on further, you said that you listen to podcasts. Could you name an example of a podcast that stands out to you?
Whew. Um, well, I listen a lot to Ezra Klein, who is a journalist in the United States, because he looks at wide-ranging issues that we're living through right now, and he brings on writers. He brings on not just political people, but authors, people who can bring us many points of view. I think my approach in working with people and trying and living is, how do we get out of black and white thinking about things, that we're on one side or we're on another, because we're in a place, I think, in our world and, in my society, where there's a polarization, and it's us against the others, and misinformation, and you can't trust people. And it's a breakdown of our, what we need most is a sense of connectedness. How can we know each other better? So I try to listen to things that are going to give me new perspectives and hear other voices that I might not encounter in my everyday life, because we've kind of retreated a little bit into our tribes, into gated communities where we're not as open. And maybe partly because of the pandemic, there was this fear of, who can we trust? Where can we go? Where are we safe? And so it's important to open up to other voices, and to let in and get to know one another.
No, that's very true. And I think it's such a great way of being open-minded. And I think being open-minded, especially in the world that we are in today, is very important.
I think it's too easy with social media to just listen to, the people who think like us, or are angry like us, or who are hurt like us. And we need to expand and get out of our little boxes that seal us off from the human connection.
No, that's very true. Now, during your academic pursuit, what's been one course that has really stuck out to you?
Wow. See, none of these questions did you prepare me for. So
that's the point.
Wow, you gave me a list of I see. In my academic career, I think, I had both academic and psychology. And in my undergraduate years, I even had a course on where I was studying psychology, and it was called physiological, which is now neuroscience. But this is in the old days. And so I even had a small lab where I had a jar with a sheep brain inside of it. And we would learn about the different parts of the brain as if we could understand everything about human behavior, by understanding everything that's going on in here. And we have therapies that do that too. If we could just change, some of the ways we think about things, change a little bit of our behavior. But there was another course I took that just opened me up, because it was about, and this was in the same department, and this was with rats in those days, experiments where rats who were identical in all of their genetics and their brain structure, and one group of rats was given an enriched environment. It meant they had wheels to play in. They had interesting things going on. I don't know what rats are interested in, but they seem to be quite engaged in their environment. And the other rats just had nothing, really. And later on, they studied, after the deaths of those rats. And what they found was that the brain was changed by the enriched environment, that our environment matters. so that individual approaches to practice can be valuable when we're working with individuals. But for instance, when there's been trauma events and individuals are suffering, we need also to not only help them to reduce the suffering, but one way of doing that is how can we enrich their environment, the people in their lives who could be more supportive. I think, that was important for me from the beginning, in seeing that we don't heal from terrible things that happen alone and by ourselves. There was a saying in South Africa during the time, the change from apartheid. It was, sorrow felt alone creates a crater in the soul, but sorrow shared brings new life. And I think that's kind of at the basis of everything I do, which is, as a therapist, I may be working to help an individual who's suffering, but I want to help them to find those connections in their life. It could be through their faith. It could be through their community. It could be through roommates, through creating family if they feel they can't get positive support from the family they were raised in, to help them find and build kinship. So to me, family is not just the family you were raised in, but that we all can create loving kinship with others. And so when I'm asking people who is family, it could be my partner and I. It could be I have a companion animal with an elderly person who lives alone. This is my family. My 6 cats and I, we're the family. It could be, particularly for Indigenous people, for people from many cultures in the world, the connection with ancestors, with those who have come before. For others, it could be a couple who want to make a new life together, and their future commitment together, and their family. So it could be
that's very true.
Yeah, and their whole extended family that's supporting them. So it takes me, I guess for me, it all takes me back to our need for home, for belonging, for connection.
No, that's very true. I think family is such a great indicator, and I'm glad that course really has stuck to you now, because it's really sort of helped ground a lot of your thinking in a way, and it's really built on what you see healing as, and what you see. I mean, especially after reading your books, when you're reading, telling me that explanation, it definitely has some impact. That course definitely had some impact on you. So I know that you have said that a lot of different people's idea of what family is. What would your definition of family be?
Well, I think there is not one single universal, this is the way to be a family. I started out thinking about our ideas, our notions about the normal family, and what society or our culture tells us is the right way to be a family. And any other way it's dysfunctional, and you're going to damage your children. And so several decades ago, I was curious, because I was doing research of families and their part with families that were with young adults that were hospitalized with serious mental illness. And I had a control group that I was studying of just families in the community. And I found the families in the community even more interesting, because so much of our mental health work is about finding what's wrong in families. And the families in the community, they were all different households, and some were divorced or separated or, with partners or extended family. I mean, many different ways. And now we're really appreciating through the research that says, yes, families that have two men or two women or mixed or any gender that isn't considered the normative way, that gender and that sexual identity are fluid, and that children can be raised in a variety of kinship arrangements. And there's not one right way that makes children healthy. It's much more the quality of their relationships.
Mm-hmm. No, that's very true. And I think especially in the way that we sort of understand what connection is and what family is in today's world and today's society, there's so much um, that we're sort of seeing beyond the nuclear family, beyond what the mom, dad, two kids, and what that whole ideological view of the perfect family is. Because yes, we see that as the perfect nuclear family, but it's not always the case. And that doesn't mean just because that's the perfect family doesn't mean they are perfect. So there's a whole lot of conversation with this today, and I'm glad that there is in terms of it's only a matter about who. I think especially when it comes to adoption, and I've had this episode on adoption previously, that a lot of adoption agencies used to only want a nuclear family household. There's some companies that only adopted out to a mother and a father, not a single mother or a single father or any other family dynamics. So I'm glad that there's a now different change in it.
Yeah, yeah. And we now have research over 3 decades that documents that children can grow up healthy. They can face stigma in the community if there is not acceptance, or within a larger family that doesn't accept. But it has more to do with parents who are nurturing, they provide support, they protect, they're trusting. So it really is the qualities. And that's what took me and my work to the whole notion of resilience and family resilience, because it isn't the type of family you're in. And believe me, there is no perfect family. I have never met one in my lifetime. But people worry a lot about it because they feel, well, I don't fit the standard or what my family or my community or the larger society says is the right way to be. And that's why I have 4 editions of a book that's called Normal Family Processes, because it took apart that assumption that there's no model that is the perfect model or the right model. Yes, it's easier to raise children if you've got 2 parents or you've got an extended family that's active. It could be aunts and uncles or grandparents, others that come in. So certainly you have more resources. But a big part of that is economic, because we can't blame single parents like it's your fault if your child is struggling, if in fact they are struggling economically and they don't have the financial resources just for housing stability or for food or for extra tutoring for their children or whatever is needed, or a single parent has to work outside the home plus be responsible for everything. We've done a lot of community work through our Chicago Center for Family Health, working with agencies in offering services that strengthen vulnerable families without pathologizing them in any way, and understanding that all families face challenges. And if they have fewer resources and more stressors in their lives, it's going to be harder. But that doesn't mean there's something wrong with the family or that the family simply isn't resilient. They just may need more supports, more resources, more social structures to support them.
No, that's very true. Now, We've discussed some of the common challenges when it comes to dealing with traumatic loss as a family. Now, after reading your book, one challenge that I've found and have related to is that adaptation to loss does not mean resolution. And that was a very good quote that I found. And especially in my point of view, I've seen a lot of family members who are um, really adapting to a loss and sort of dealing with, okay, that person's not in the world anymore. Let's go about it every day and not really think about it too much. And I wanted to ask you, why is it important for us to grieve a loss?
Because healing happens through grieving, not closing it off or putting it behind us. I think Australian society is influenced, as the U.S., a lot by Western European ideas about, no muss, no fuss. You should get over it. You should put it behind you. You should move on, and that we don't have a good tolerance. Again, because we don't know what to do to fix it. To just understand that grief is going to be a process that ebbs and flows over time. There's some mistaken ideas about grief. One is that there are stages of grief, and you kind of, I'm at this stage, and now I'm at the next stage, and then whoops, how did I happen to come back to this one again? Well, the reason is that the research shows there aren't these clear stages, and then finally we get to the resolution and we put it all behind us, because it will get easier to bear over time. But for instance, the death of a child, you carry for a lifetime, and it will come up in different ways. Maybe at the anniversary, death of a parent will come up on Mother's Day or Father's Day, or a family holiday where it's just not the same. There's somebody missing. There's a hole in the heart of the family. And so it's more like there is a chapter in the book of life where somebody valued, loved, important, could be a caregiver, is no longer physically with us. But the other thing that the research shows is that we don't detach from that person. We don't detach from our feelings. There's the concept now called continuing bonds. And what that means is that healthy grieving is about carrying the love and transforming from the physical presence. My loved one is no longer with us every day. We will lose the hopes and dreams we had for the future together. But I can hold the memories of who they were, what our lives were like, and carry ways to remember that, to celebrate that life, to celebrate that love, carry photos, stories that we share with others. And what I've seen that I think I learned the most in my practice over time from families is that they come to a place in their grief where they say, it's not going to be over, but I can bear it better now. I can begin to move forward, not happy all the time, but with a memory of how they would like me to go forward without them, not carrying anger, not carrying, at a car crash or someone who took their life, or at a drug that ended their life, or that a suicide that ended their life, or it could be a larger disaster where it's so unjust, so unfair, that you come to a place where I want to make something good come out of this tragedy. It will help me to bear it if I can. And I think what happens, and I know in one of your questions you asked me, it's about making meaning out of a tragic loss. that helps us to bear it. So it might be that we're never sure exactly how it happened or why, this person took their life when they did, or was it an accident or was it not? Did somebody, that we want to try to put that together. But sometimes we come to a place where we just say, I feel more compassion now for others who have gone through losses like this. And I want to do something. I want our family to do something that's going to make a difference for others. Can I tell you I think a lot of the people that I've known in my personal life as well as patients or families that I've worked with, one family came to me. Their daughter was hospitalized with bipolar disorder, and that's a serious psychiatric condition. And the father didn't understand bipolar. He was a lawyer, and so he didn't understand mental illness. And she always is fighting with me, and I don't know. She's so beautiful. She's so talented. Why can't she get her life together? And the mother was more, what I think about and I worry about is sometimes she gets very depressed, or her feelings are too intense. And she says things like, I don't know if I can go on. And I worry one day that we're going to lose her. And I worked with that couple for a while, and they came to a better place. And then they called and they said she took her own life. She ended her life. And I had to help them with their grief. It was enormous. It was their only child. And she was a beautiful young woman with such potential. And they came to a place in their grief. They called me back on the 1-year anniversary, and they said, it's still hard for us, but we want to do something in her name, in her honor. We're going to set up a small foundation and get some donations to remember the beauty in her life, what a beautiful person she was. And we want to set up this little foundation, and our faith community, we asked them, could we put on an event once a year in the community for just everyday people in the community to understand mental illness better, to understand suicide, because we didn't. And I don't know if I could have made a difference, but we want to make a difference for others. There's another family where they lost their son to gun violence. And the mother said, I have to find a way to forgive because I can't heal until I'm able to forgive this youth that pulled the trigger. There were gangs in the community, and it was a stupid thing between them. The husband said, I can't do that. I'm too angry. But he found a different pathway where he started working with other members of the community to reduce gun violence in their community. And so that was his pathway in grieving. And hers, through writing a letter, working with a priest who was tending to the young man in prison so that he could turn his life around, which he did.
Wow.
So people are going to find different pathways out of their pain and suffering and their struggle. And yet it's important too in a family, like in a couple, that the husband can say, I can't choose her path, but I respect it. I know that's important. And she said, I understand his anger, but I won't be torn apart in anger. And so I will join him in this community effort, and and they did. And they did that in Chicago. They banded with people, brown, people who were brown and black skin in different neighborhoods, rich and poor, who all suffered gun violence, to make a difference in their community. So I've seen what can happen over time when people channel some of that anger, some of that hurt, some of that pain into making and they say, I want to make something good come out of this tragedy. And it helps them in their healing too. I'm sorry, that was a very long way, but I sometimes when I share stories, it's more meaningful than just giving you
Yeah.
principles.
Oh, I agree. I think stories, and especially in your line of work where you've seen it firsthand, you've dealt with it directly, there's that huge connection that not a lot of people can have. Not a lot of people have the privilege of seeing directly. So to get your point of view and to hear these stories from your line of work is incredible. So it's more than happy for you to share any story that you have. There's I do want to ask a follow-up when it comes to, like you said, the two ways that they were dealing in grief. How do they not have any animosity between each other in, okay, saying this is how you want to deal with your grief, but this is how I want to deal with my grief? How is there no, and how do you deal with the conflict that can happen if there is that change in dynamic on healing?
Sure. Well, I'll tell you another story. And maybe there was a couple that this was a pandemic story. It's very. They had three small children, 5 and 3, and then a newborn, and
Hmm.
they wanted to just get out of their confinement in their house for their children and themselves. So we have you have Airbnb all over the world. So they decided they were going to rent a cottage in the countryside. They lived in the city, in the countryside, and it had a small pool in the back. And they said, this will be perfect. We'll escape from, what we're going through. And after they had a wonderful week together, and at the end, the parents were packing up, and the 3-year-old little boy, toddler, went out through the back kitchen door into the backyard and went over to the edge of the pool and fell in and fell to the bottom. And the parents found his lifeless body and could not revive him. The medics couldn't revive him. Well, they didn't come. They came for help really more than a year later. Because what happened over time was they began to blame each other. At first, they were angry at the company that rented them the house. There should have been a latch on the door, because people, in looking to understand a tragedy, who caused it? Were we at fault? Was somebody else? And then they each started feeling the other was to blame. Well, I thought you were looking after him. No, I thought it was your turn. We were packing up. You were supposed to. Well, you should have known. And the silence then between them just went into a separateness and a walled off. And the children then started having symptoms of distress. They came because the boy was now acting out in behavior that brought them in. And the little girl, the infant now, couldn't sleep at night and was clinging to the mother constantly. So sometimes there'll be symptoms in the family because of the unbearable grief, and the family isn't able to come to a place to find healing. And that's when couple counseling for the parents or family counseling can be really invaluable.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a very sad situation, especially when dealing with the blame game. That's always sort of and I know a lot of stories, and a lot of my friends and a lot of my family, when that situation really does come up to play, and the reactions are very reactive, very impulsive, and okay, this is the person to blame, this is the person to blame, rather than really seeing beyond that. And I think, I mean, especially in that moment of grief, it's going to be very difficult. So yeah, that thank you for so much for sharing that story with us.
And I think That happens too. I did talked with some professionals in Turkey last spring after the earthquakes that devastated several different regions, and it was overwhelming. And it would be like, I know you've had wildfires, and we've had wildfires in part of the U.S. When there's widespread loss of human life, of homes, of communities, and it is absolutely overwhelming. And there's a sense of what can we do in the aftermath. And the other part about grieving is it's very hard to grieve when you also have to make a new life. What do you do when your home is destroyed, your community is destroyed, maybe the schools, the workplace, everything is devastated. And so you may be grieving loved ones, and you're also pressed at that time. How are we going to survive and go forward here? And then there may be anger, like, how did this happen? And today we have to understand, with climate change and even with a natural disaster like an earthquake, that it's never simply natural, that there's always components like, what about the buildings that collapsed, the shoddy construction, the financial dealings that led to that, or the lack of the government oversight? What about that people didn't come to rescue us soon? That where was the government? Where were our officials? Where is the help? So part of healing from a larger collective trauma in a community disaster is overwhelming. And so when you are also dealing with personal grief, like we couldn't rescue, a loved family member or child, we also don't have time and space to grieve because we have to move forward. So it might be that there needs to be time and space for that grieving that may be a little delayed because there's such a press of demands in the present. Can I tell you one story about that?
Let's go ahead.
Okay. From the Turkish situation. My daughter, I'm very proud of her. She works in international humanitarian relief, and particularly in mental health and psychosocial support in extreme disaster situations and war. And she, for several years, worked in Turkey along the border of Syria, working with programs for Syrian refugees. And so she knew now, years later, she had lived in one of the cities that was totally destroyed by that. And so, reaching out, knowing people, I know I'm here, I'm at a distance, but I know some of the people that, the same with working with people who were in other cities, other places. I can't be there physically with you, but now we have so many ways to connect that when there is a disaster, we need to connect through the internet, through the phone, through whatever ways that we have, so that people don't feel alone in their tragedy. There was one woman that I consulted with, and she herself had lost. She had gone through the earthquake in Turkey, and she said, "I don't know. I'm really at a loss right now, and I just need some support because first they pulled me out of the rubble, and then they pulled my mother the next day out of the rubble, but we couldn't find my brother, and we searched and searched for my little brother. We thought we had lost him. Finally found him in day 4. And there we were in a tent, but my mother had grievous injuries. And then she died.
Mm-hmm.
And how unjust that she should die after being rescued, and the injustice of it. And now, how can we go on without our mother? And that's just one story of one family. And at the same time, there they are. She said, you know, we came from Syria as refugees. We settled here for several years. We don't even have our identity papers. We don't know where to go, who will help us, how to carry on. So in a widespread disaster, there are many needs. And the first, I think, is for that psychosocial support. And that's where community efforts, multifamily groups, where you come together with your neighbors because you've all experienced loss of one way or another. And again, suffering alone, but seeing that we've all come through this. I think one of the most really heartwarming things that we see after a natural disaster or any kind of major event is how everyday people, neighbors, come together for one another, even for strangers. And to me, that is that there is that potential for resilience in each and every one of us that sometimes doesn't get called forth until there is a tragedy.
Yeah.
And we reach out because we're all human and we have compassion for one another.
No, that's very true. And I think community support, I think especially when you're mentioning the Australian bushfires that happened not so long ago, the amount of community that was built and the amount of people that helped everyone out, that knew exactly where to go, that used their little kayaks in order to help families and find people and go to places that rescue teams were afraid to go to. They knew that they needed to help, and they, especially when it came to the elderly, I think there was a few stories that I was watching on the news of elderly, like elderly homes that are just being visited, and making sure that everyone there is okay, everyone there is getting out and leaving and completely aware. So the community support is always amazing. I think in times of trauma, in times of sadness, there's always somehow we're always there for each other. We don't know each other. We've never met one another, but somehow we're there. And it does also show a lot of hope, especially for me. You show a lot of hope for a world that is happy, a world that is everyone does care about each other. It's a small little utopia in a way. And it's nice to see that there is an essence of um, community there.
Exactly. And sometimes in just everyday life, we get caught up in our own struggles,
Mhm.
and we don't know our neighbors, or we don't reach across in that way. But that's the thing, that sometimes it takes a tragedy to call out that humanity that's within us. Or in families too, I mentioned how sometimes couples break apart when there is a tragic death, particularly of a child. But the research also finds stories, and this is through studies that go in, not just measuring, things with, we do a lot of measurement and give people questionnaires, but it really is listening to the stories of people who have gone through these things. And what they many often will say, it's because my husband and I we were just so busy in our lives trying to keep everything going. But it wasn't until it was like a wake-up call in our life that how much we need each other. And we pulled together in a way, we put aside other things, and it made us realize what really matters in our life and how important we are to each other. And we came together, and we're actually stronger as a family, not because our child died, but because somehow it was, some people say it was epiphany. It called for something that made us shake up and shake off some of the things. We've seen that after the pandemic too, where like a lot of people who have the ability to work at home, and a lot of people have to go to work and they don't have that luxury. But they've said, wait a minute, I've heard many fathers who say, I've gotten much closer to my children. The mother in our family used to be the one that was taking care of everything and much closer. And I didn't even know how much, that love that bloomed between our children and me, because I was home more. I was here. I was responsible for more. And I don't want to give that up. And I don't want to go back to work every day.
Yeah.
But sometimes you have to. But the thing about a tragedy is that sometimes and this is the meaning making, it's like, I want to reevaluate what my values are, what we might have lost over time when we got together, all our hopes and dreams. But then we got into, the messiness of everyday life. And we lost some of that. And we need to find it again. Or maybe making a lot of money and having one more, device and one more, kitchen, whatever, or one more car, or one more, that maybe that isn't as important as spending time together. And I think so in a way, coming out of the pandemic, that has been a wake-up call for many families about let's just be more inventive and let's rethink about how we structure our life and what we've taken for granted and what really is important as we go forward.
Yeah, no, I can definitely feel and relate to that. I think my dad, during COVID, he was able to somehow restructure a lot of his work to be online and be able to work from home. And there was that huge connection that he never saw with us as well. So it was really nice to be able to have conversations with them throughout the day, not him coming home from work and us having to relay things after it's already happened. We can tell him while things are happening. So it was really nice to sort of for him to really be a part of us growing up rather than, and all my life he's been at work constantly. So to be in my 20s and to have him there so I could have him constantly. It was a huge change, it was a difficult change because we weren't used to him being at home, but it was also very nice for him to be in on the action rather than hearing the replay afterwards. So no, it was great.
Exactly. And again, like, how do we make something good come out of this? This adversity or this tragedy that we have been through.
Exactly.
Or I've also seen, in my own friendship circle and in my family, like somebody, there was a death, and there was one of my relatives who said, I knew he was critically ill. It was a brother who he was estranged from, and I meant to go see him, and I know he wanted me to go see him. And he said, but it never got to the top of my list. And it was like, as he said that, it was such a chilling line. But I knew how people can just, there's so many demands in everyday life that our lives have gotten top heavy with too much. Children overdressed to get into college, they have to pile on all these things, and it's just all too much.
Yes.
And so, and what that did for my relative was he said, I'm not going to make that mistake again. I feel so badly. And now there's no way, it's too late. But you know what he did? He set up a small event for kids in the community that he knew his brother had been a mentor. in the inner city here in Chicago, and he said, "I want to do something in his name uh, that would make him proud and to remember
Wow.
him." And that's what I'm hearing. It's like, who was this person? And I didn't value him enough in his life, or we had these disagreements that were petty from adolescence. Like our dad favored him, or he got more, or I didn't like the way he always was putting me down, whatever, all those old grievances. And then when you come up to, someone is dying or you've lost something precious, um, there's time to do something good about it. Hopefully
That's very
before.
true.
Hopefully before. I know I lost my mother too soon. I was in my late 20s. And my parents were in California, and I was on the East Coast, and I was in my clinical training. And I had responsibilities. And I had a budding relationship and, plans for marriage. And what can you do? You go back and forth. Now we live often at a distance, intergenerationally. Kids move away, they go to the city, or they go to a place where they can maybe have a better future. And it's very hard to be nearby. And I remember feeling like I could go back and forth. And I wasn't there when my mother died. And I went for the funeral. And then I went right back because I had all these responsibilities and I had all these life. And it really wasn't until later, but everybody said, "Oh, you're so strong. You're so resilient." And that is not. It's when the press of things make us suppress our grief because there's just no room for it, no place.
Yep, that's
But
very true.
Yeah. And so it really took time until, and I mean, I was an adult, so it's like, well, I'm grown up and I'm independent. And it was like, whoa, wait, that was my mom and how much to me. And it was only later when I could give myself time and space to do that. And I then made a really firm decision. I would never do that for my dad. And my dad, we had our struggles, in every family. No relationship is perfect. And there he was out in California, and I was still far away. And it took me 4 years after my mother's death to say, I've got to make some changes here. I want to get closer to my dad, and I want to be sure that when his time comes, I'm going to be there for him. And so he lived, several years after my mother died. And when he was terminally ill, I was an only child. And so I had to go out there and handle everything around that time. But I did. And I had a 1-year-old, I had a small baby, an infant at home, and a husband. And I said to my pediatrician, what am I going to do? Because attachment theory all tells me, the mother has to be there for your child. And she said, well, it isn't just one person, but it's that child has loving care. It's your father who's dying, who you can't be replaced. He needs you next. And that was wise. And I needed to hear it from my pediatrician because, well, what do I do? And I did. I took my child with me sometimes, but I had to go back and forth and do that. And it was very precious time with my dad that I had to work toward because we didn't have the best of relationship. But I knew that mattered. And, it was really very healing.
No, that sounds amazing. And I think I can definitely relate in so many ways with my not immediate family, but my distant relatives. My grandparents are not in the same place as us. And there's that whole idea, okay, yes, they're getting older and I can't keep traveling over to see them. My parents can't keep traveling to see them. So, and I think COVID was probably the worst time for making sure that they were safe, making sure that they were okay. But knowing that they have family that's close to them as well is sort of nice in a way, because it allows us to really know that, okay, they have other people around them. They're not going to be by themselves. They have people who are constantly looking out for them and constantly buying groceries for them and making sure that they're okay. So there is that sort of calmness in it, and all we have to do is make sure that we keep in communication. So that is,
Well, and you are most fortunate that you have podcasts and you know how to use Zoom or
yes.
whatever format that you can use. And I think like there are a lot of families. My dear friend and colleague Celia Falikov is a leading authority on working with immigrant and multinational families.
Mhm.
You might want to chat with her sometime.
Oh,
She
definitely.
She's from Argentina, lives in Southern California, and her children, of course, moved away to all different parts, and she spends a lot of time traveling. But she talks a lot about, how to help people who are living in two different places still have two hearts, to
Mhm.
not go off because they can't be physically present. That, to keep those channels of communication open and frequent, um, and loving, because there are many ways that we can be there for each other.
Yeah, that's very true.
You can
Uh,
ask right now.
well, now I'd love to move on to our practice and habit part of the show. Um, so, what practice would you recommend to a family to cope with their traumatic loss after a disaster or a difficult situation?
Yeah. Well, over the years, from the resilience research and from my own clinical work, we were able to distill like certain beliefs and practices that really help in families. And of the practices, first of all, is keeping communication open so that you don't shut down with each other.
Mhm.
You can respect when somebody needs quiet time or separate time, but don't let them just withdraw and be alone. Keep that communication open and open to sharing sad feelings. Be tolerant of some, because you're not all going to be on the same page at the same time. And for some, they may get through their intense grief sooner. Others may carry it longer. And then it's going to be like this. So to be able to understand and with caring, compassion for one another in a family when you're not in the same place, that you can hold it. And about the communication, make time for respite from the grief, that you can have moments of maybe out in nature, of an evening. We like to have popcorn and watch a funny movie together, uh, something, or where you cook a meal together, or you just do something that just reinvigorates, that revitalizes you as you're going through those pathways of grief. And that's all about sharing. Um, Another part is the organization. When somebody in the family is missing that you've really counted on,
Mhm.
that parents and other adults to have to provide flexibility and parenting and caring for children and other vulnerable members, but also to see it not, and especially when there's a single parent, now it's all up to mom to do everything or whatever, that it's going to be teamwork, that everybody's got a part to play, and that every child in the family, no matter their age, there's something they can do. If grandma is ill and dying, I can make a little sunny, small children can make a picture to take to grandma to make her smile, or that they can help with cleaning up the kitchen or doing things to share, to be part of either preparing for loss or helping with the grief in the aftermath. Um, on the beliefs, it's important that there is a sense of value of we can get through this together. We may not know how we're going to do it yet, but we're going to be here for each other. That's the main thing about that resilience is relational, that we'll help each other through this. And a second part of that is hope. How do you find hope when everybody is in despair? And one person may have to hold hope for the others for a while, lend some hope to each other, hold each other through dark times until they can regain hope and maybe reorient what they can hope for, that they have to change maybe their hopes and dreams a little bit. And the last part of that on the beliefs, and these are practices, because it isn't just holding beliefs, but you practice them. You practice hope. And you have to practice what you can do to make a difference. We call it practicing the art of the possible. How can, given that our losses are so devastating, what is it that we can do now in this time, in this place? So it's looking at what's possible, taking some steps forward and holding each other through that process. And finally, I guess the last part of beliefs and values is having some larger value orientation. It may be your faith. It may be a faith community where that community helps to give you strength and hold you through it. Or it may be more personal faith, maybe through scriptures or contemplative practices. It could be through yoga, through music, through art. It may be through nature. For many people now, it's finding nourishment in feeling connected to living things outdoors. For me, that's very important. And I know it's going to be personal. So it's, how do you find, when I actually, many years ago, was doing a workshop in Adelaide, Australia, on resilience. And there was a part of it on spiritual resources. And I remember that the people who were participating in the workshop said, "Oh, you can skip over that part because we're not religious here. We're not spiritual here." And I said, "Well, how do you find nourishment?" And they said, "Oh, no. I said, "Well, how do you find meaning? How do you find connection?" And they said, "Well, we would call that nourishment." And I love that word because we can find a more, we can call it spiritual. Some people don't want to call it spiritual, but ways that nourish us, that give us a sense of inner wholeness, that we feel connected to ourselves, to others around us, and that we find a larger connection with humanity or with our community, with a higher power, however we conceive of that. So that there are many ways through secular values, a sense of a moral compass. And I think connecting with those values is really important at that time. So I've mentioned many different ways, but these are all part of family life. And for some people, they may find that some are easier or are more meaningful for them to do. But all in all, it's that keep communication open to support each other. If you have to reorganize your family life, find a way to be flexible and still find a new center. I don't like this word, a new normal, because we don't even know what that is anymore after the pandemic or after adversity strikes. But we'll find a way forward if, most of all, we're working together at it.
So now we're reaching the last section of our show, which is the open mic. It gives you a chance to talk about something that you're passionate about or something that you feel we haven't mentioned about before and earlier in the show. So in the last minute or so, I'd love to give you the floor and get your thoughts on today.
Thank you. Well, as you could tell from our conversation today, um, human resilience is really what I most care about. And what it is not don't worry, be happy, but it's really how do we cope and adapt and even grow stronger out of adversity, meaning when terrible things happen, tragic events. And in my own work over more than 3 decades, I've been working with families who have suffered sometimes catastrophic losses in very tragic ways. And I did some early research and writing throughout my career, but I felt the need now for a new book for people who are working to help other families, and for also for families, people who are going through maybe impending loss of a loved one, or a recent loss of a loved one, or maybe someone long ago and they are still suffering or struggling with that loss. So I think it's a book. It's called Complex and Traumatic Loss, Fostering Healing and Resilience. And it presents ways that we can be helpful to one another in our relationships, personally in our own lives, with lots of stories and just some simple principles that we can apply either when we're facing a threatened loss or in the immediate wake of loss or long after. Sometimes I've seen people who have come to me and their child is now at the same age that they suffered a loss a generation earlier. And it calls for things out of the past. Or a couple comes to see me and they're afraid that they're going to lose. A couple comes to see me and they're struggling over whether to have a second child. And at first, they talk about everything that means, how it's going to change their life, whether they can afford it. But that's not the real issue. What it is that when he was a small child, his mother died in childbirth with his younger sibling. And he's really afraid of losing his wife. But he didn't realize that's what all of his upset and anger were about until we touched upon that. And so we carry those losses with us, and it's not surprising they're going to come up later in life. And that's normal. Grief is a normal process. It can be intense. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with us. It means that healing is a lifelong process, and there are going to be times that it will come up. And I'm hoping that the book that I wrote just recently with Guilford Press is going to be helpful to those who may be suffering or struggling or wanting to help others through those times.
Well, thank you so much, Froma, for that last little takeaway. And that book is actually really amazing. I read it over the weekend, and it's really good. So I definitely appreciate it. And I definitely would recommend it to anyone who feels that they really want to know more about healing and understanding a lot more about resilience as well. Well, thank you so much, Froma, for joining me on the show today and for speaking a lot of different stories and your own personal connection with a lot of the people that are going through so many turmoil and so much resilience and having to build back their lives after such incredible and traumatic losses. Now, if there's a way that audiences would like to get in contact with you, do you have contact information that I'm able to give out to them?
Absolutely. You can give them my email, and maybe a photo of the book would be good too. If you have it.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah,
yes.
Actually have the book would be good.
Yes, I have that one. That's the book.
Okay.
I think that's one of them, one of the books that was sent over. So I definitely appreciate that.
The other one, which is on family resilience, if they want to see that as well.
Yes, and then that's the other one.
Okay. Thank you so much.
2 books.
Oh.
Well, thank you so much again for joining me, and I hope you guys enjoyed the episode as much as I did. I'll see you all in the next episode.
Thank you very much. Okay, it's a pleasure.
You've been listening to Altogether, the Family Science Insights podcast, produced by the Family Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people find it so that we can grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at fa.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Dina Sargent. Thanks for tuning in.